I've talked to a lot of people about Utahism, and everyone I have talked to about it thinks it's absolute fucking like insane bullshit. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm not really inclined to disagree with them on that take. So what do you? So I don't know. So what do you tell all the people that I've talked to, a lot of people, about like all these doubters about I guess the plan or the ideology of Utahism?
I think people are they'll question it until you sort of put it into a context they can understand. Like the idea of when you boil it down to its core, we're effectively talking about federation, which is one of the foundational pillars of the type of government we have in the United States. So you can tell somebody, hey, we want to readjust state borders to represent populations. And if that doesn't click with them, they're missing a certain thing, which is states don't so much matter. The border of what is New York doesn't matter. The border of what is New Mexico doesn't matter. It's the population. That is what is meant to have authority within a federation, because a proper federation is built on recognizing they have different groups of people, people with different interests, different lifestyles, different economic needs. And federation accommodates those things. It's not meant to be an arbitrary thing, because if you want a federation that is literally a bunch of squares in a map, in a grid, that's not going to be a well functioning system. Like, frankly, if you think that works just fine, why don't we do our districts that way? When we're redistricting our borders and whatnot, why not just do arbitrary squares? Well, because we recognize that that doesn't reflect actual populations. It's going to be a mess. When we try to redistrict, we try to take into account a lot of things. And unfortunately, there's a lot of gerrymanderers out there who are going to try to sway things their way or another. But I think the foundational idea of the United States is sort of representation. And when you fail to provide representation at what is probably the most crucial level, the most crucial unit of the country, which is the state has its own constitution, it has its own executive, it has its own laws. It is a country within the bigger country, and it's supposed to serve that specific function. If the state is not fulfilling that purpose, the federation is just failing to operate correctly. So, general purpose with Utahism is have the states actually represent that, have the states actually represent what they are. And I brought up, yeah, some people don't wrap their heads around that. Then it's like, all right, well, what's a good example? You're from Virginia yourself.
Yes.
Virginia, the north of Virginia is not like the south of Virginia. The
Mm-hmm.
south of Virginia is not really like the west of Virginia. And the east of Virginia isn't exactly like the west of Virginia either. You have a couple different states, different populations in there. So imagine if I said, all right, look, Virginia, I'm going to take power away from the people in the north of the state, and I'm going to give power exclusively to the coastal parts of the state. Or I'll take power away from the coastal parts of the state and give it exclusively to the mountainous western part of the state. There's a problem there because those populations there don't understand the needs of the rest of the state. Why do we have states in the first place? Because, of course, America is not the same from one end to the other. So, same goes for the states. You think just because it's a smaller unit, it doesn't have those problems? The point of the state is to be able to represent whatever that population might need. And I don't mean to drag on for too long on this, but this is sort of like it just seems like common sense. And I guess for some folks, it doesn't click until you just sort of go deeper into the meat of it.
So are these, I don't know, redrawn states, we'll call them? Are these redrawn states, are they supposed to be political functions or are they regional functions? Because I was looking through the Utahism website. I don't know if you've, like, it's still up somehow. I didn't know you're still paying for the address. But I was looking at the Utahism website. It kind of seems to flip between, oh, these are state identities, but of government function, but also kind of regional identities. And that's I think a problem because like you're saying I'm a Virginian, right? And it's like, well, my identity as a Virginian is nothing like someone from the West. But in the end of the day, if even pushed on it, like at most I'll say I'm a Tidewater Virginian, but I'm still identifying with my state, right? I'm still identifying with the state that already exists. I am a Tidewater Virginian. So, and I
Okay,
feel
but
like
you're
Utahism
hold
kind
on.
of
Let me. I'll stop you right there. would you say that you're an American?
Yeah, I would say like I'm American, but if you push me, I'd say
Yeah,
okay, well I'm a
but hold on.
Virginian. But if you push
Exactly.
me,
So
but
that's
with
that's what I'm
Utahism,
getting
right?
at, though. I can say you're an American. That is a true statement. At the same time, you are a Virginian,
Hmm.
and specifically, you are a coastal Virginian. So
Yeah,
that's the specificity of it. It would be wrong for me to say you're an American and you're a Californian. It would be wrong for me to say you're a Virginian and you're a West Virginian or a Western Virginian.
that
That difference matters. It's the difference between saying I am a New Yorker from New York City and I'm a New Yorker from the Adirondack. That's we're both New Yorkers. We're two different types of New Yorkers.
that's true. But here's the thing. So like I'm looking at the Utahism map right now. My state, my area, is now a part of some state called fucking Tidewater. We have more North Carolina than we do Virginia. And here's the thing, because like, and I think in the East Coast, Utahism makes far less sense. I mean, the West Coast you might have an argument, but in the East Coast, it's like I. I would probably far more affiliate with someone of Richmond or even Charlottesville than I would of someone just across the border into North Carolina and like fucking Elizabeth City or something like that. Like I think there's a like I and like another thing I've had a problem when looking at this Utah as a map. It kind of ignores the effects of modern infrastructure like the highway systems and the rail systems that have actually caused a much more stronger regional identity. Look at the case of what the state of West Virginia. West Virginia tore apart. A big part of what caused West Virginia to tore apart was because their rail connections connected towards the Ohio River, not towards coastal Virginia, not towards the rest of the state of Virginia. And looking at the Utah as a map, and you kind of ignore any sort of impact that modern infrastructure has put into the connecting of states. Like it's easier for me to get to my state capital of Richmond than it is to get to Raleigh, which is equal distance from where I live. Right?
Mhm. So the map, the Utah is a map that's out there is a rough concept. That's not a final design of this is exactly how the states need to look. And this is actually why I put the map together, because it gets discussion going. Specifically, you're talking about, well, I have more in common with someone from this part of the state than somebody in that part of the other state there.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to infrastructure, that was taken into account, but it was held, and again, the map itself is more just a concept idea, but infrastructure was taken into account. It was just weighted as a less significant factor compared to other things, depending on what part of the country we're talking about. Now, when we talk about, if you look at New York, for instance, you look at Philadelphia, you look at Boston, infrastructure was very crucial for those regions because the infrastructure it's vast, it is enormous, it is an extremely significant development there. In other parts of the country, it just isn't as thoroughly developed. It plays a less significant role in sort of the cultural identity. Now, you might say you have some more in common with somebody from Richmond, Virginia, than you do with somebody in, let's say, Raleigh, North Carolina. uh, the lifestyles that you live in the coastal parts of your state are without question going to be more akin to those of somebody in a coastal part of North Carolina than to somebody living more inland in your state. It's like saying, and there are going to be transitional areas, areas of debate of, okay, does this belong here? Does that belong there? That's something I consider a lot. Again, I'm from New York myself, and I have experience with that. Albany, for instance. Is Albany a part of the urban core? It's pretty far removed from New York City, but you do have a lot of New York City transplants there. A similar thing could be argued with uh, coastal parts of North Carolina, which historically were settled by a lot of that same population which inhabits coastal Virginia to this day. And I mean, heck, the religious demographics are very similar. The economic and class demographics are very similar. um, the economics are similar enough. Infrastructure in an area like that is something that can be built upon and developed and uh, more thoroughly improved. But it shouldn't be the end all be all in discussions like this. It's like if, say, for instance, the Cape to Cairo Railway were developed in Africa, does that suddenly mean that South Africa is, has a lot more in common with Egypt, just because it's easier to get from, let's say, what's it called again? I'm trying to remember. What's I'm trying to remember the name of that Johannesburg. To get to Johannes from Johannesburg to Cairo, then say Johannesburg to some place in Namibia. Uh, no,
I would say
Namibia is
yes.
obviously closer.
I
You
would
would
say
argue that Johannesburg has more in common with
Well,
Cairo.
I would say no, but I would say I feel like you're downplaying the important. Now, I'm mostly using American examples because we are talking about America at the end of the day, but also as it's just what I know, right? But I would say yeah, like the reason why we nowadays have two Dakotas are because one Dakota was infrastructurally one half of the territory was infrastructurally connected with Minnesota, while the other one was infrastructurally connected with Illinois. Like once again, West Virginia, for example, Wheeling, which for I think a while was the state capital or territorial capital during the Civil War, was connected via the national road, which once again brought it closer to states like Ohio and Pennsylvania as compared to Virginia, which it broke away from. Um, but yeah, like fucking half of Arizona we only have because of the Southern Pacific Railway. I know I'm using train analogies, but yeah, no, like I feel like you're vastly downplaying. Like now, obviously, from a massive distance, from like Chicago to Los Angeles, that's insane, right? That's like there's nothing, there's very little connecting those two. But like if you look at the areas in between being connected by this infrastructure, like it does connect to communities which are tied tied to it more, far more, and which develops a more unique cultural region.
Well, what I'm noticing here is you are placing a high emphasis on infrastructure. You're placing a very high emphasis on infrastructure in all the examples we've given, whether it's Virginia, North Carolina, South Africa, and Egypt, and now the Dakotas, as well as West Virginia and Virginia itself. And that's the one that sort of stuck out to me because while yes, infrastructure did play a role in the change there, we can't pretend that's the only factor. Geographically, we're talking about two very different cultures there, two very different economies, and two very different populations. West Virginia, obviously, it's a lot more mountainous. There's not a lot of room for the type of plantation agriculture that became very widespread in Virginia, settled by two very different populations of two very different economic classes. The plantation economy of Virginia allowed that region to become very wealthy. The economic situation of the hill country in West Virginia, that place has always been relatively impoverished. Yes, you could say it was more closely connected to the Ohio River Valley than it was to other areas of Virginia. But yeah, infrastructure is not the end all be all there. We're talking about different economic circumstances, different cultural circumstances, different class circumstances. It's two different worlds entirely. And of course, slavery was a big factor back in the day, which ties into the economics, which ties into the plantation stuff. So, that was a big factor in those two states dividing. Yes, infrastructure played a role, but it wasn't the end all be all. We can talk about the Dakotas as well. You're right, there was more um, I guess, intertwining between the economics of one part of the territory and one state to another. Uh, but deeper than the infrastructure was just sort of what they were best suited for. The north of the state was more industrially developed, geared more toward the infrastructure of the railways. The south, on the other hand, had a lot more to do with agriculture. It was more of a plains state. While one focused a lot more on industry, the other focused a lot more on, growing crops. Um, and I think that's a natural reflection of why there should be a divide there. It's like, yeah, look, you two are living very different lives based on two very different types of economics. And yeah, infrastructure plays a role in that, but it's not the sole reason why.
So obviously, culture plays a part. But why do you think but like yeah, that's the thing, right? Like I would say America, like in American history especially, transportation in general has been far more important than because the whole reason why we even have, I guess, a lot of the regional identities that even developed were because, well, mostly for some sailing, but like a lot of the cultural differences we only have because of through via transport or cultural regions we've now developed are through regional transportation. Like I don't know. I feel like I personally think you're downplaying it. But another issue I feel that there is with Utahism, it's like a lot of these like regions that you have outlined, kind of, and also Utah is like the example state, kind of don't really exist. I'm not gonna lie. I don't think like who's gonna say I'm a Huronian, right? Like I'm from Huron, or I'm like Utah. You like look at Utah, right? Like Utah in its current state. It's not really like obviously the stereotype is that it's the Mormon capital of the world, but like 50% of Utah is like Mormon. It's not very. It's a very culturally secular state, regardless.
I think that also plays into the idea that this is the whole thing. If I can go back when you were talking, just to put a bow on it, when
Mm.
you were talking about infrastructure and transportation playing a big role in the development of cultures in America, that's yeah. I mean, technically, you can. That's like saying the fact that you have mass migration to the United States today is because the airplane exists. You know, it's like, okay, yeah, the airplane can facilitate the movement, but why is that population moving over to the United States? It disregards a whole slew of other factors and oversimplifies it to one thing. Like if you got rid of the planes, if you got rid of the transportation factor there, you'd still have mass migration to the United States, especially from Latin America. The same thing goes with a lot of the development of cultures. It's not just because of infrastructure and levels of infrastructure that different cultures developed. You had different populations coming here, bringing over their cultures, developing different economic styles, bringing over different traditions from overseas. New York is not unique just because we developed the Erie Canal before we switched over to trains. You know, like that's not why we are the way we are. We are the way we are because of our unique history and what has gone into sort of the development of the populations here. Uh, but then going over to the example of Utah that you provided. So again, the map, when it comes to the identities there, the map is just a conceptual idea. Utah. You ever been to Utah yourself?
No, not no. I have not been to the state of Utah.
If you go to if you go to Utah, it's very evident to see that the Mormon culture has shaped that state and continues to shape it to this day, even in one of the most secular and transplanted areas, which is the Salt Lake City area. The influence and culture and the identity of the population is just sort of undeniable. You might argue, well, the South isn't really Southern at all because it's like not even 50% white Southern now, is it? You know? But nobody's going to make that argument.
Well,
Um,
actually,
yeah,
that does bring up.
populate.
You go. Finish.
Yeah, let me just wrap up the Mormon example there. The Mormons, they do have an identity. They have a population. They dominate that region. It's when it comes to actual populations and culture, it's not it's not always about pure majority number. It's about scale of cultural influence. You have examples of this, like say the Austrians when they were setting up their empire and all their little spheres all around. Uh, clearly dominant culture there. The question is, how willing are they to enforce it? The Mormons are very tight knit and they're very well aware of their culture. They have a type of um, national identity in a way, much in the same way Southerners have a national identity. I think with a lot of the populations in the United States, there is a distinction there. They just sort of lack the type of nation consciousness that is there. It's undeniably a thing. Uh, but it's been obscured by this idea of broad Americanism that you're all just sort of the same thing. You're all American. You all like hamburgers. You all wear cowboy hats. You all like guns. That's what defines you. But there's a lot more to all of us as different types of Americans than just that.
But going back on your going back, you keep referring to like the South as a full region. Like I know you're just making a generalization, like the South, right? But another thing that kind of that irks me personally, I've noticed that because in your redrawing of the state borders, you have more states. It's like over 70, I think, counted. I think I counted like 77, 76. And why more states? Why not less states? Because I feel like, because you're a federalist, obviously. You're a federalist, and you were talking about, oh, this is a federal, like, this is for the like a federal government. Like, why more states? I feel like having more states is a very confederate stance, which I'm not against personally, but but yeah, no, it's like you have a far more like you in general are far more authoritarian leading, and I noticed that why more states? Why I feel like it like I feel like more states would probably be more problems. Think of like the Ogala Aquifer, right? Like 5 states cover it right now, and I think in the Utahism, like obviously, I know I'm going off the conceptual map, but like in the Utahism map, there's like there's far more than 5. I think it's like probably 6 or 7 or 8, right? But like
No, it's one state. That one state has dominance over the Ogallala Aquifer in the Utahism
the
map.
Ogala Aquifer goes
Nebraska.
from the whole ass like Great Plains area. That's a little more than like there's a state called Ogala, but not like covering the whole aquifer. It's just a slightly bigger Nebraska minus some. But yeah, no, it's like I feel like there's I don't know, a bit of a dissonance between I guess what you personally believe as far as I know and the fact that there's more states in the why more states, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
So I think you're confabulating two things about me, which is I like a lot of Federalist figures like Alexander Hamilton, but you're also misunderstanding when I speak about federation. I am speaking about the actual idea of federation, not federalism as it was defined as the political party in the United States. Those are two separate
No, no,
things.
no. As in like a more
There's
centralized federal
an
government, just in general. You seem to be more inclined
well,
for that.
I'm speaking about federation here, and I just pulled up a map of the Ogallala Aquifer. It does reach further south, but the majority of it, the overwhelming majority of it, is concentrated in the map that we put together within Nebraska. Traces of it would be, what are we looking at here? Yeah, you'd have a few meters of access in New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, but the rest of it would be dominated by that state in the map there. Again, it's conceptual, but the idea is uh, orienting these states not just toward, not just toward factors of economics, but also resources as well. Geography is a big factor in that. So when I'm speaking of federation, I am speaking about the most quintessential definition of it, not a political party of federalism. I'm not speaking about Hamiltonian style federation necessarily, but I'm speaking about what the United States is built upon. The idea that you have a national or central government as well as a federated government across the various states, that the states themselves have their own local autonomy. That's the essence of what the United States are. That's why we are the United States. We're not simply the Union State. We're not, this, that, or the other. I think that's an essential part of what we are. You'd have to sort of be blind to not see it. You go from New York to Texas, and it's a different culture. You go from Texas to California, and it's a different culture. Uh, California to Minnesota, Minnesota to Utah, Utah to Florida. Uh, yeah, different. There's just different lifestyles here, and they all deserve their due representation because you can't put those all under a single code, at least not a thorough code, and expect it to work for all of them. They all need governments tailored to themselves. That being said, of course, there should be a central government. There should be a union government that keeps all the states together. And I think that's really the model that our founders had laid out there. Uh, there's no there's no contradiction. There's no uh, confusion in that mix. It's our system works, but the actual way that the states are laid out is the problem with that. Everything else could function perfectly. You keep the structure of state government, the balance of power between federal and state government as it is, and that would work fine. But if you can adjust the boundaries of what those states are to actually reflect the populations who live in those areas, then you would have better representation. You would have a more satisfied public. And you would have, I think, a government that functions a lot better. Rather than have a federal government that's aggressively competing for a lot of these sort of culture war issues, you'd have a state that is so precisely tailored to the lifestyle of the population that inhabits it that they have pretty much the paradise on earth that they want. They don't have to try to impose that at the federal level. I hear often, and it's not something I'm too keen on. This thought of, oh, we need to, well, I guess it goes two ways. There's the conservative perspective of don't California my Texas, you know. But then there's also the perspective of make America Florida. I'm not particularly fond of either of those ideas. I think the cultures of the states and, well, the populations within those states deserve to preserve who they are without the worry of the state from across the country is going to attempt to impose its style of culture upon me. I think that's a big contributor to why we're so polarized and divided these days, because even within a lot of these states, with a few exceptions, uh, you have such a degree of fear and such a degree of dissatisfaction that you don't have proper representation. That no matter how hard you vote, no matter what you do, your own country and your own state doesn't really represent you. People talk
So
about the best type. Well, I'll just wrap up with this last thought. People talk about the best type of government being local government because it's what you're most familiar with. Why don't you extend that to its natural conclusion, which is why don't you make what you're familiar with as big as it can be? You know, if you have a state that is oriented toward a particular type of economic, social lifestyle, environment, culture, whatever it might be, why not follow that through? I think that's the very basis of self determination, the very basis of what we stand for as a country.
so a lot of things I think to unpack. So I guess starting off with the most recent, wouldn't I think wouldn't this I guess redrawing of the states as far more heavily regionalized. I don't think this is going to work because the United States, we have a very dynamic population. Like, look how American population trends since hell, even since just the mid-century of last year, no less 100 years, no less since the 1900, the turn of the century. Americans keep moving around, and that's what, like, I highly doubt that implementing Utahism would stop that dynamism. But hypothetically, if it did, wouldn't it, I guess, make the polarization even worse? Because now you have large chunks of like, if not the entire country, all now just like on their own, kind of going in their own direction type thing, almost pulling the country apart in a sort of way, I guess, like to visualize what I'm trying to say. You have so you have like the state of St. Louis, and the state of New York City going one direction, and then the rest of the fucking country is going some other states like fucking Appalachia and Colorado are going their own direction, and then other states like Tidewater and like Ogalla are going their own fucking direction. I feel like this would worsen the divisions within our country instead of the
I
system
don't
we have
think so
currently.
because when you have, yeah, I mean, I guess there's going to be a lot for us to unpack. I imagine. Yeah, I imagine you have a few questions, but just to
A
tackle
ton.
this one quickly is uh, the idea of representation. I think you can probably have like the EU is a good example of this, where each member state sort of knows like, yeah, I'm like my own nation, I'm my own country within this union. We're together for our own mutual interest. You know, we know that we have a common identity as Europe, but I'm French, I'm German, I'm whatever. Uh, the idea that, oh well, this is just going to drive further division, not at all. The idea, the real division driver is knowing that these divisions exist and refusing to acknowledge them, letting them bubble under the rug with no accountability and no answer. So people get angrier and angrier, and they don't understand why. Lay it out like, look, you you have your own like desires and interests that are not being met. So here's your own little state. So you can have those desires and interests properly met. So now suddenly you don't feel the need of, oh, okay, I don't need to break away from the union. I don't have to rebel against the government. I don't have to demonize my opposition. I'm happy in my state. I'm content. And I'd say the big divide there, I guess, not letting state policy bleed into federal policy, is the federal government should focus on bigger picture things, and the state government should focus more on the day to day. Your regular experience. The federal government should be focusing on our national security, on our trade, that sort of the infrastructure, of course. Um, the states should be the ones focusing on social policy, focusing on improvements of local quality of life, local economics. That's sort of what they're best tailored for.
So you compare these new states to the European Union, but you also said earlier that the federal system will stay as is. So okay, so are we gonna are which way are we going? Are we going towards more like the EU, where we're essentially a confederation with a like a government in DC, with just like a government that suggests things in DC, maybe passes some universal policies, but not a lot? Or are we just staying as is? We just redrew all the borders because I feel like it's a bit redundant if it's the latter. If it's the former, I understand. I would understand. I guess Utahism more. I'd be, I guess, more for it. I feel like it's
Well,
quite
I'm sorry to
redundant. Just
disappoint you, but it is the latter. It is maintaining the status quo of government balance because what we have is a good balance overall of function. What doesn't work in the equation is that the states don't represent anything. They're arbitrary. If What would be a better example? Let's take a country like, I don't know, let's say Russia, for example, right? And instead of Russia having its various oblasts and districts and structures, you just sort of redrew a bunch of random lines in the country, a bunch of random straight lines. You've made the country less efficient, and it's not even just that. Let's take Germany, right? Germany has states within itself. Uh, we get rid of Bavaria, we get rid of Saxony, we get rid of Hanover, and we just draw like five straight horizontal lines across the country. That's going to fuck up representation terribly. That the state has the country has even a country as small as Germany does have distinct local populations that want their due share of autonomy from the federal government, and they do. Germany has a good balance for a country of its size. Uh, for a country of our size, I think we have a good balance as well. The problem is just that the representation isn't there with the borders as they are currently.
so do the borders change? Is this like a census or something? Like would the borders, I guess, change with the like changes in population? Like what happens? What happens if a state develops its own inner regionalism? Like a city, let's say we'll have a state that's mostly a region, but one of the cities either has a change in economic output that drastically alters its economy, or one of the cities just got so large that it's essentially kind of like its own thing at this point, right? Like look at like the
Hmm.
development of Denver and the history of Colorado over the last couple last while now, or
Yeah,
or
I
actually
think
Kansas.
adaptability is very important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say
I
Kansas
mean, if
City,
our
Wichita.
constitution adapts over the years. We add amendments to that. I don't see why over the course of a census or a few censuses, if a population does change, if the lifestyle changes, if power in a state shifts and you get sort of a bipolar situation where one pulls in one direction, another one pulls in another radically different direction. Yeah, you can absolutely account for that and be like, okay, look, there's just cause for a new state. Let's provide that. This is sort of what you were asking me before about why so many states. I don't think that we should be married to a round number like, oh, we need 50 states because that's, I'm used to that number. We need 13 states, like the 13 colonies. I don't like arbitrary. Arbitrary is good for symbolism, it's not good for practicality. And the number of states we came to in the concept map was based on the measurements that we did. And again, it's just a concept map. However many states come away from it, we could have 49, we could have 50, we could have 51, we can have more, we can have less. But as long as there is due representation for the populations there, and people feel content with the boundaries of their state and with the representation they have, uh, I think that's when I think we can be content with that. And if new states emerge, if populations seek statehood, there should be a process for that.
So you seem to put a heavy emphasis on the idea of representation, but also it's like New York City, right? And just like the New York metro area, 12 million people. That's a state, all right. But also you have like a large chunks of the country which have very few people, and there are also states as well. And I get it, like we have that on the current system. But if you're trying to do representation, wouldn't you want to like balance that out more? Like
Like equally, like
yeah,
equalize it
because you
out.
keep like I'm just pushing what's this representation specifically? Is it like an equal representation? Is it what type of
Well,
are we going
sure.
by
When we're
population?
talking about in the concept map we put together, we did a baseline of because obviously when it comes to statehood, you have to factor in representatives in Congress, senators, that's all important. And the way that it's distributed right now is very, very broken. You have a state like Delaware, which I can't remember the number of populate. I can't remember the exact population it has, but I think the measurement, the comparison was between Delaware and Wyoming, where Wyoming, I think, gets a representative for every 500,000 people it has, whereas for Delaware, it gets one representative for, I think, every 900,000 people it has. That is not fair and that does not make sense. Uh, so we sort of set a baseline of we're going to do a states need to have approximately 1 million people. That was for the concept idea. And I think that there probably should be a basis for that if we're going to have an adaptability where people can petition for statehood. It's like, look, you want to be a state, but you're only 10,000 people. That's you're going to have a lot of unfair representation at the federal level. So if you have a population of say a million people or so that feel that they don't belong to a state, but rather should have their own state. All right, we'll take it into account, we'll evaluate it, and we'll go from there. Um, the matter of population and statehood, we set an approximate roof, or rather, an approximate floor. So, same principle applies. If a state has a population of a million people, all right, you get your one representative and your two senators. If a state has a population of 13 million people, all right, you get, I don't know, let's say, just off the top of my head, let's say eight representatives and two senators. That's, again, the system we have as it is very functional. It works very well for this. I think the main thing would have to be sort of adapting how the distribution of representatives happens. But I think that's long overdue because the system as it is broken. You know, you can't have a situation where uh, Wyoming effectively has twice the representation that Delaware has because its population is smaller.
You keep saying that the federal system is fine as is. The federal system is fine as is, which I think you disagree with subconsciously. I've seen your Twitter, but we'll get to that later. But I guess wrapping up with the Utahism discussion, what's stopping cities from abusing the shit out of this? Because you keep saying that, oh well, we're gonna keep the federal system as is, but we're gonna just while also saying we're gonna actually revise how a state can be made. It has to be now be a million people because I think beforehand it was only like what, like half a million you needed, not even. But now it's like okay, you need a million people. What's stopping like massive metropolitan areas like the Los Angeles area or New York City? What's stopping like Manhattan and Long Island from saying, well, fuck, we're out of here, we're out of the rest of the state and just splitting off because they have a million people and they have a, which is I guess a valid enough argument to just say, hey, we're splitting off. Like
Well, this is why when we spoke earlier about infrastructure, sort of the interconnectivity of the New York metro area is what's so important. Some people were asking, should we make, during the discussion of the map creation, should we make Long Island its own state?
Mhm.
And I specifically thought that would set a very bad precedent because Long Island is a relatively small territory. It does have a noteworthy population to justify being its own state. But culturally, it's very much entangled to the New York metro area. In terms of its infrastructure and economy, it is also very entangled to the New York metro area. So when it comes to can we just split off a bunch of little metro areas into several states for the sake of gerrymandering? That's when something like deeply interwoven economics and infrastructure sort of come in to say, well, the city might be diverse, the city might be this, that, and the other, but it doesn't make sense to split it because there is just such a deep interconnection there. And then you have other examples like, let's say, let me actually pull up the map for myself so I can pull up an example from there that we can both look at.
Because
Because
I,
there
I
are
have an
examples of,
example in my mind right now. A little biased, but I
yeah.
have one.
So we have an example here in Houston where, could we make Houston the metro area alone its own state? I mean, theoretically it has the population for it. But that whole area surrounding Houston is effectively, in for lack of a better word, a colony of that city. That is a cultural extension of that node. And that is really what cities historically have been in comparison to the territory around them. We have a habit these days of looking at things as there is the rural world and there is the urban world, instead of realizing that these are integrally things that are deeply connected to each other. An urban area, at the end of the day, is a cultural hub, a concentration of civilization. So you have in Iowa, I believe that's Des Moines right there, in the little dot in Iowa in that map there.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, I mean, you could be like, oh, well, Des Moines should be its own state. Well, Des Moines, comparing it to the rest of the state, is just a cultural, centralized hub of what Iowa is. It might be a little bit more, I guess we could say, economically left leaning or socially left leaning than the rest of the state. Uh, but they're kind of inextricable from each other, similar to Salt Lake City and the state of Deseret on the map, similar to
You
Arizona.
say this actually you say this. So Des Moines, Iowa, inextricably Iowan, culturally, economically. What about Chicago? Chicago is its own state, and yet is a massive. It's a massive. It's the outlet for American Midwestern agricultural goods to the rest of the world. Yet it's its own state, but Des Moines is not.
Hmm.
And I have another example as
Chicago
well.
has a well. I'll just build off that real quick. Chicago is far more developed and far more autonomous in a way than Des Moines really is. Chicago is at the point where it is at present in our not in the concept, but in our actual real life model. It is an Illinoisan city, but its influence extends into Indiana, it extends into Wisconsin. That's a city that has grown beyond the bounds of its state. That is a city that is effectively, uh, it should be effectively its own state. And that's sort of how we've represented it here. I think we have a few examples like that. Los Angeles is one example. Let's see, what's another one? I'm just looking around the map. St. Louis is another good example. New York, of course. Massachusetts is
Yeah, why is
effectively an
St. Louis
extension of
one?
the.
That I'm
St.
genuinely
Louis is the.
curious. That's just me being
Yeah, St.
curious.
Louis is an interesting circumstance because in our analysis of the populations there, you have all these Midwestern cities like Chicago and Detroit and Erie, and they've all sort of developed culturally around the same time, really came to prominence in the late 1800s. But then south of them, you have a predominantly agricultural area. The key exception is the city of St. Louis. St. Louis, because of its position on the, is that the Mississippi? That is the Mississippi, right?
Yes,
Or is that the Missouri?
that's the
Okay, I
Mississippi.
mix those
It's
those
at the
two up.
confluence.
Gotcha. So, because of its position there, it was a crucial urban hub during that period, and it received the same level of development that a lot of these other Great Lake cities did, as well as a significant amount of immigration from the same populations that were moving to these Midwestern cities. So effectively, it is a Midwestern exclave. It has very little in common with Kansas or Southern Illinois or Iowa. It is effectively a part of the Great Lakes, isolated inside of the landlocked U.S.
I guess. Oh, I almost burped. But yeah, no. So like, okay, how about the inverse? So we have, and I think I have a pretty valid argument for this one. Norfolk, Virginia, the Hampton Roads area combined is about 1.1 million people, and we're part of the Tidewater though. But we don't want to be a part of the Tidewater. We want to be our own little city. Like I'm saying, right? Like, what about like if some random, well, you can like extend this, like if parts of like Los Angeles just want to break off like the fucking Imperial Valley or something like that. But in this case, what if like Hampton Roads wanted to break off from the rest of the state that they were tied with, because we're also their capital according to that map? And I know it's a conceptual map, but we're treating it as if it's real. But what if we wanted to break away, like because we think we have a role in the deal? Like, what if the regionalism literally, like, what if the regionalism quite literally fails, and now there's regionalism within the regions that were supposed to fix the regionalism, right? Like, you see where I'm kind
Uh,
of
well,
going
that's
with
not a
this?
well, that's not a failure of the regionalism. That's the system working as it is. If you think that you have just cause to say that you deserve your own state, I think there should be an evaluation of that based on how does your culture compare to the rest of Tidewater? How deeply interconnected is your infrastructure to the rest of Tidewater? How interwoven is your economy to the rest of Tidewater? If there's sufficient reason to say, okay, obviously the people of this part of the state are living a very different life from the rest of the state, perhaps they should get their own state.
Is the inverse allowed as well, where two states are like, hey, we're very similar, we should join?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
All right. So I don't know, because you keep saying that we're gonna keep it the federal system. Like I don't know all it's now. Maybe it's because I have cognitive dissonance or whatever. I'm not a very smart guy, but it's like I don't know. All of this stuff just feels incoherent in my opinion, just because it's like, okay, we're not going to touch the federal government. We're not going to touch how the federal government operates, but we're gonna fuck up a whole lot. Like about like we're gonna like be fucking around with a whole lot with how the state system works. We're gonna be fucking around with like we're just gonna be we're just gonna internally we're pretending externally, yeah, the country's the same as is, but it's like you'd have to like loosen up so many like regulation, like economics. You'd have to expand several services now that they have to be split among the several states, and then all of this stuff. It's like I feel like we're weakening a state power in this, like the idea of states in this way, where it's just like, oh yeah, they can just come and go as they want. I don't know. I feel
Hmm.
it's I
Well,
would say it's Holy Roman
go ahead.
Empire esque, but like those obviously had far more autonomy, and you keep like I feel these have almost no autonomy. These are essentially just census zones, glorified census zones. These aren't states,
Well,
in my
what
opinion.
what you're expressing is a very conservative concern. The idea that look, the states effectively have always been this way. If we break up the state borders at all, then the states are going to lose power. On the contrary, this is going to give the states a lot more power because you have a concentration of representation rather than what you have right now. A state like Pennsylvania is significant in elections because it's a swing state and people feel like they can play with it. That is precisely why it is weak, though. Pennsylvania, in its far west, is effectively a Great Lakes state. If you've ever been to Pittsburgh, if you've ever been to Erie, you feel like you're in a very similar spot to Buffalo, New York, or to even some parts of northern Ohio. Central Pennsylvania is basically northern Appalachia. It is, it's Pennsyltucky, effectively. And then the far east of the state is pretty much, a metro area. It is an extension of the greater Philadelphia area. When you put all those regions together, you have a very weak state because even though its population might be large, it can't do anything it wants to do. Maybe it can inch its way along. But if you break Pennsylvania up into three states that have a strong concentration on what their local populations actually want, suddenly they can go as far in any direction as they want and they can get things done. You free up the Pennsylvania area. This is one of the very sad things I saw traveling through as you're transitioning from western Pennsylvania to central Pennsylvania. There's a spot called Oil City. Oil City, back in the day, as you might imagine, big oil boom town. There's coal towns around Pennsylvania. There's a lot of these resource towns in central Pennsylvania. You can tell this is what kept them going. Pennsylvania today has a few regulations which make the exploitation of those resources very difficult. Now, that might have changed recently under the Trump admin. I'll have to double check that. But imagine a situation where central Pennsylvania wasn't constrained by the policies of the West or the East. Imagine a situation where Eastern Pennsylvania is free to develop its public transit and its infrastructure and, let's say, even its healthcare system to its public without worrying about, well, Central Pennsylvania, these people are going to need welfare, these people are going to need this, they're going to need that.
So
You
what's
give the state a lot more freedom to be what it really wants to be.
so what's
Now, I just want to
preventing?
backtrack. I
Oh,
just want to backtrack real quick because I want to just tackle every part of your question if I can remember. Yes. So the fear that are we going to turn these just into census zones? I just want to reiterate that again. It's we should not be married to the idea of the state borders as they are because those borders don't mean anything really. The borders are supposed to represent us as populations. We, the people of the United States, are the ones that are supposed to have the power. But if you break that power up arbitrarily, like imagine if this, our state borders, you can say have some planning to them, some of them do. But imagine like our borders were literally just a bunch of vertical lines. Well, does it make sense to be married to those vertical lines just because they've always been there? I don't think so. I think it's more practical to have the boundaries actually represent what there's the populations that live inside of them. So yes, it can be a little scary, but I think ultimately the people get a better government, the states become stronger, they're able to fulfill more of their duties, and there was one more aspect of your question that you asked. I'm trying to remember what it was. Do
I
you remember it all or
I
no?
don't remember it all, but I'm ready for my next one.
Go ahead.
So it's like, okay, I feel like, for starters, I feel like John C. Calhoun talking with Andrew Jackson. This is like, I'm a states guy. I like my states. All right, I like the states the way they are, but I'm more inclined for that. We'll say that. But it's like, what's preventing a bunch? So you now have Western Pennsylvania, you now have Mountain Pennsylvania, and you now, like, look at West Virginia. You have a bunch of West Virginias in this country, and I say this in a negative context. Usually, I say that in a positive one, but I say this in a negative context because now you have a bunch of states which are uh, chronically reliant on single, especially out west. When I was looking at the map, you have tons of states that are now chronically reliant on primary or very, very certain industries and certain sectors and whatnot. So, and you talked about uh, regulate environmental regulations, and you've talked about you talked about environmental regulations, which I feel like, which you are for more inclined, which we can discuss after. But we have these states. What happens when the federal government just goes its own way, regardless? Now we still have the same problem, but now they're entire states, and kind of hypocritical coming from someone of a more libertarian angle. But what's like the only thing keeping a lot of these places afloat is because of the money from the other parts of the state coming in, right? So, but now in this Utahism situation, we have a bunch of states which are heavily chronically reliant on a bunch of various primary-based resource extraction or other types of industry, or even manufacturing. But now the federal government's gone its own way, and now all these states are just stranded as is. We just have like a mega rust belt that goes across the country at this point. Am I wrong?
Mm. So your concern there is the poverty. I will say I appreciate the Andrew Jackson comparison. I'm a big Andrew Jackson fan myself. But
I'm a big
so
fan of
part of the
Jackson too, but
concern,
I like Calhoun as well. I think he was right.
mhm. Oh, I can imagine that. I can see that given your more libertarian background. Um, so one is the concern about the economics of the state. Two is reliance
Economics,
on
economics. If the federal
economic
government goes
anchors
the wrong
effect
way,
anchors.
yeah.
Okay, yes. So I'll just break that up. We'll start with the federal government. because I think that's sort of its own separate thing that we can tackle on its own. Then we'll talk about the economics. So the federal government in this situation, it's going to operate as it is. We are a union. We are 50 states currently. Those states send representatives to Congress. We all elect a president. That doesn't change in this situation. So if the country as a whole decides we want to move in this direction, when it comes to, say, a trade policy or defense policy or whatever it might be, uh, that's just the reality of union. You might disagree with that, given the Calhoun proclivities. I know he was a nullifier, but that's just sort of the arrangement we have right now. Not every single state is going to be satisfied with how federal policy will go, but that's one of the compromises we make as a union in our system as it is. Now, moving away from that to the question of economics. So, the idea of anchors, like if we take away Vegas might be a good example here. If we take away Vegas from Nevada, well, what's the rest of Nevada going to do? I don't think it's sensible. And I've been to Vegas and all over the northern and interior parts of Nevada. Uh, it's interesting how much of Nevada, in a way, tries to be like Vegas. Like if you go to some northern parts, you'll find other little casino towns and whatnot. But that type of dependency on an economic anchor that is so far removed from the rest of the state, I don't think is practical. I think if we can lean a little bit into your libertarian side there, to your more free, well, not free market. I guess free market would be the right term. If you if you change the circumstances there, it's like okay, well now the state needs to adapt. It needs to learn how to make the best use of its resources without depending on what is effectively the handout of an area that is nothing like it at all. I think a perfect example is, and I guess because I'm more familiar with it, here in New York State, New York City contributes a lot more to the economic productiveness of the state than the rest of the state does. Now, upstate New York, while they do depend on this wealth to a degree, they also resent it because the influence of downstate New York makes it so that money, when it does get invested, doesn't go to the places it needs to. I heard this awful, not awful, but it just kind of absurd story where you had these politicians get together and they said, you know what, we're going to invest in upstate New York. And at first I'm like, okay, sounds good. What are they investing in? They're investing in public bus routes in like the middle of farm country. And I'm thinking, why are we doing that? They need infrastructure is what they need, frankly. There was a spot called Amsterdam. This was years ago. And I heard about how they were finally renovating. They were removing some of the lead piping that they had. And apparently there was a big piece of pipe that had been replaced by a hollowed out tree trunk. Yeah, so I think I think when it comes to local investments and the development of local economics, it's better to say, look, you're not going to depend on this part of the state that's not even really related to you at all, that has very little in common with you and really can't give you what you need. We're going to give you an opportunity. You have the autonomy, you have the independence, you have the freedom to really become the best you can be. If you want to be a lumber state, you can become a lumber state. If you want to develop your cattle industry or your tourism industry, if you want to become multifaceted, you can do whatever you want. There's no other part of the state that's going to hold you back. But
I feel
you
West
now have the
Virginia.
autonomy and freedom to do that.
I feel,
But
given what I now know about Utahism, the lovely ideology, I feel that West Virginia far more exemplifies what Utahism is about, or actually it's Utahism in practice, than Utah itself. And that's why I was bringing up these concerns, because federally you'll have, like, federally a lot of these handouts that West Virginia's getting is because, are because that federally they got fucked over, and that's why they don't have any jobs anymore. And that's what the problem is. So now that's what my fear is. Like, for better or for worse, I feel as if Utahism will just lead to a bunch of West Virginias across the country cropping up, especially if we're keeping the federal government as is, and then also adding on my concerns that this feels like it's just weakening the state system in general and more centralized power, which is like. And now I kind of resignated on this. I've already resonated on this a bit. It's like, yeah, I know with the growing executive power, and especially whoever comes next as president, it's just the executive power is probably going to be the most powerful person in the country, even more so than like just a supreme justice. But yeah, no, it's like I feel I feel like Utahism is setting up just a country of several failed states, even failed urban county, like urban regions, we'll say, in like this almost, and I'd hate to say it, delusional pursuit of representation.
Is that the end of the thought?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
that's the end of the thought. Yeah, it's like,
no, I see the concern you have there, but I want to re-emphasize. I think again, I'll go back to Nevada there. Uh, Nevada overall might seem like its economy is doing okay because of the pull of Vegas, which, effectively is one county and one city. But you go to those northern parts of Nevada and it operates very differently. The spots that try to emulate Vegas are just sort of like, they're not really thriving the best they possibly can. Nevada has a whole lot of different resources that it can explore if it just tries to be that, if it explores what it is that it can really do. West Virginia has a lot of circumstances that have contributed to why it is the way it is. And I mean, it's sort of been that way ever since its inception. I mean, it was founded by a population that was particularly impoverished. The culture that was established there was never really one that was in the pursuit of wealth. We think of West Virginia as being exploited, and certainly there are ways that the federal government has harmed them. I think deindustrialization has been a big factor. The move away from coal has been a big factor, but that's also somewhere that's a field in which adaptation is very important because while we're not abandoning coal just yet, it is sort of a fuel of the past that we are moving slowly away from. And that's just sort of the reality of existence, really. If towns and communities rely upon an economic staple that is going out of fashion, that just isn't practical anymore. It They do need to develop new ways of doing things. It's like if Chicago had just tried to be like, look, we want to cling on to being, uh, well, maybe Chicago's not the best example, but uh, the Rust Belt, I think, is a good example. The fact that you have these areas that were impacted by deindustrialization. If you have the federal government step in and move toward policy that's beneficial to those areas. And I think if you have a lot of states that are impacted by that in this model, then suddenly the federal government becomes a lot more aware of them. Suddenly the federal government's going to be like, oh, crap, what, like 20, 30 of our states have bad economic circumstances because of our trade policy, because of our environmental policy, whatever it might be. Then the government can adapt to it. Uh, and those states will have a louder voice. Those states will, you won't just have like West Virginia on its own. If that's actually something that'll be emulated, which I don't think necessarily will have, you will see. Um, then the states will be able to respond to it. They will have more ability to react to it. But more than anything, I think you'll have states have the adaptability at the local level to build themselves up and go in directions that actually strengthen them at a decent pace. One of the biggest problems with upstate New York is, again, that investment that's coming from the city is going into spots that they don't need. If they put that investment into fields that they actually do want and need, uh, sure, some of those areas would still be very agricultural, they'd still be very rural, but they would be far and away better off because they're actually putting money where it needs to go instead of the money being sort of invested by people who don't understand what the local culture and lifestyle is.
So like, what if the state's trying to, I guess, go because you like, oh, well, they'll be more adaptable to move on in their own direction. What if the state's trying to move in a direction that I guess is against the grain of what the federal government is interested in? Like, look at Florida during the Biden years or Minnesota just a couple months ago. Like,
Florida during the Biden years
like
has
Florida under
come out
DeSantis, right?
probably. Yeah, that's you're talking about a state under a governor. I mean, is Florida really doing all too bad?
No,
Like, is
Florida's not
Florida
doing horribly, but I'm just saying, like, what, like, but look at West Virginia. West Virginia, I feel is the end. Like, I hate going back to it, but it's like it's the end. It's kind of what I feel like that Utahism will result in. I feel like now, obviously, that's probably the worst case scenario, but still, it's. I feel that's what Utah like.
well, the way you're describing is you. It almost sounds like you expect every single state to fall perfectly in line with whatever the government is 100% of the time. That's not going to happen. That never happens. You're going to have some states that are like, well, I don't like this federal government. I want to do this. I want to do that. That's why you do have a boundary of state and federal government. That's why you do have a boundary of what states can do versus what the federal government can do. We're not going to make the federal government suddenly replace the state governments. The state governments are going to have a lot more power to do what they want to do at the local level. You'll have you'll have situations where, I mean, heck, Pennsylvania is a perfect example of this, where during the Biden years, you had sort of this debate of, okay, Pennsylvania, it's got all this large conservative population. How's it going to go? Will it vote for, will it go toward more conservative policy at the state level, or will it go toward more democratic policy at the state level? If Pennsylvania was more like, if it had more, what's the way to say, if it had more cohesion, if the population was more sort of unified in what their views were, and I think in this case we can bring up Florida as an example under DeSantis, where there is sort of this consolidation of a sense of policy identity. Then it doesn't matter if the federal government opposes you firmly. You're able to maintain at the local level policy you actually want. Pennsylvania can't do that right now because Pennsylvania is torn between three different identities. So the conservative identities, because each of them will have different types of conservative identities, uh, can be sort of played like they can be played like instruments against each other. Um, so if you to address that concern of yours, if you do have a situation where you have let's say you have like 6 to 10 outlier states that just really don't like whatever the federal government is doing. Of course, the federal government is going to be able to do certain things within the same bounds that the federal government can now. Uh, but the big difference is you won't have a situation where the federal government can be like, well, we're going to push for this policy among this part of the state, and that's going to drag you more in line with us. The state has a lot more solidarity in what they want. So they
Mm,
can't easily be swayed one way or the other. If the state is going to be taken in line with what the federal government is, the federal government needs to make an appeal to them. They have to be like, okay, we can give you this. We can compromise on that. Will you agree with us then? That's how you get a majority of the state to go behind you. The federal government won't be able to get by swinging just 51% of the vote anymore. It'll be all or nothing pretty much.
all or nothing. Well, isn't Oh wait, never mind. I'm thinking winner takes all. Well, let's try to turn rhetoric into action. You were president, right? So you're president. You ran. We'll pretend it was a very close election. How the hell are you implementing this fucking domestic agenda? Absolute. Like you got to go into Congress. Like you have to go into Congress.
This
Tell
isn't
literally
something.
every
Yeah,
governor and senator in the
it's
country.
mm, it's not something you can just do with an executive order. But there's different ways that you can do it. There's different pathways to victory. I always say I can work with a handful of states that would be interested in implementing something like this. A couple governors to draw up an interstate compact between each other. I can campaign and rally together my faction of the party or anybody who's really interested in getting this through. And if Congress, well, does Congress even need? I don't think Congress needs to authorize interstate compacts. That's just between the states. So yeah, the states would just be able to basically put this together. It just would be well, it would be de facto, but it wouldn't be on paper necessarily. You can work with an individual state where you're like, look, let's have sort of an internal division of the state where on paper, at least officially, it's still, let's say, the state of New York. But within New York, you have the Adirondacks, you have Western New York, you have um, the Hudson Valley, and then you have New York City, operating like three different states within one state. But of course, the big game changer would be getting Congress together for basically an amendment to really say, look, our states can't just be stagnant throughout all history. They do have to be able to adapt to the populations. Because while states' rights do matter, the state itself is meant to represent populations. And if the state does not represent the population, it is failing to do its job as a state. So the big game changer, the big win across the board would be getting an amendment through. If you can't get an amendment through, interstate compact, if you can't do interstate compact, working with the states at the individual level, uh, and I guess just letting people know that it can be done. That's really the first step to any of this, really, because as you brought up early on, a lot of people say, "Oh, that sounds crazy. That can't be done." There's examples of territorial land exchanges. They've just been on a smaller scale. Yeah, you've had bigger scale, of course, with like West Virginia and Virginia, but that was, of course, in the time of war. Um, but this is something that can be done, and it's something that should be done because if we don't have states that represent our populations, then the idea of us being a federation is like it's pointless. We should, if we don't have proper representation at the state level, then the states don't serve any purpose. They're just for show. We're a federation in name only.
Do you think currently? Because here's the thing: assuming that you run young, so the next what 10 years for you, I highly doubt that either party. I highly doubt currently in the directions that they're currently going, either party would be primarily interested in passing such a radical agenda. We'll say, because I don't think either one sees this as a benefit for them. Like I don't like I don't know what direction you think either party's going in, but I do not see one that is headed towards Utahism or there'll definitely be a redrawing of districts, but not redrawings of states. I can tell you that.
Well, let's be realistic here. Parties, especially when you have times of deep establishmentarianism, you're going to have a hesitancy to do anything that's going to shift party power. That's unfortunately why our states are so broken. That's part of why our states are so broken today. It's because of the whole North South divide, the slave state free state divide, where it's like, okay, if we're going to make a southern state, we have to make a northern state, and vice versa, instead of making states for the sake of populations that move there. Um, but think about something like congressional term limits. That's not something that's in the incentive of either party, really. Uh, but it's something that people ultimately want because we want our politicians held accountable. Yes, a redrawing of borders isn't going to have a partisan slant to it. Neither party is going to be like, yep, this is going to be the thing that secures our power forever or whatever. That's not the point. It's not a power grab. It's meant to actually benefit the lives of the American people and really provide for one of the fundamental purposes, one of the fundamental values of our country. And it's not even just an idealistic value, it is a value that does work. It is a value that is, hey, we want local representation. Um, so while it's not going to be something that one party or the other takes up for the sake of with enthusiasm of, oh, this is going to give us, institutional control, I think it's something that can achieve the same level of desirable reform as congressional term limits, as what's the term? What is it? Campaign finance reform, uh, transparency, any of these things.
Well, even with a such populist draw, like as we've seen with this current administration, even if you have that political, especially early on, even if you have that political capital, we've seen that you just cannot. Even if you have the populist leverage, you can't, or the popular leverage, even that fucking interest get in the way, you know. But like, interest get in the way, or you just do not have the political capital, right? So it's like I don't know. I'm not trying to be. I'm not trying to like destroy. Like I'm not trying to like get you down. But it's just like realistically,
Oh,
like you
no,
have to be
no, you have to
realistic.
understand. It's not about the trying to get this all done in one fell swoop would be unrealistic. You don't need to do that. That's not really how politics work in most cases, especially not really in the United States, with a few exceptions. Uh, but once you get the ball rolling on something and you prove that it can work, then it gets momentum. Then it keeps going. That's why I think at these individual state level, having state level and interstate compacts would probably be the best starting point for something like this. And I think you could have I think once that gets going, more people pay attention to it and more people call for it. Frankly, I think on a long enough timeline, even if I don't live to see it, I think it could become an inevitability as long as the ball on it gets rolling.
I'm not gonna lie. I think that's kind of fucking a little bit kind of insane. I don't know, man. I just do not even in long term. Like I just don't really. I just don't see. Well, I don't see the practicality of it, firstly, but I don't really see this playing out. It's like, okay, let's play imagination. Let's play a game of like let's imagine you you're president day one. Like, how are you doing this? Like, what the fuck? I'll be your advisor. I'm just gonna say you have like fucking no political cap. You have no political leverage whatsoever.
Well, look,
And
I'm not planning on running as president tomorrow. I don't have a game plan on this written up right now where I can give you every single answer. But I understand how politics in this country work from a historical perspective, how reform movements work. The fact that this is something that crops up all the time in our country. It just has never really been given a name. And the fact that it crops up so much, I think, speaks to the fact that, yeah, our border situation has not been satisfactory. So I do think inevitably it's going to happen. Whether it's me or somebody 100 years from now, I think it is necessary if the United States wants to be a functional federation.
I feel like you're just setting yourself up to be the next William Jennings Bryan if we're going by the whole progressive era slant that you like to do.
Well, if I end up William Jennings Bryan, at least I'll have tried. But I'll aim to be more of a Theodore Roosevelt if I can.
Maybe. Yeah. Also, yeah, I do have a question on that. Why do you say the neo progressive era? I I have my own takes. I do see the similarities. I think we might be closer to the 1890s, if even, but I think we're closest right now to the 1970s. But
You
what
think
is that?
1970s, right? Wait,
1970.
what do you
Yeah,
mean?
18. I think we're closer either to the 1890s or the 1970s if we're going by the whole cycles of American history. Because I've watched some of your stuff. It's like I've watched on politics on the cycles of American history. You keep saying that we're the neo progressive era. You keep saying Trump is Wilson, stuff like that, right? It's like I don't really agree with that.
Oh, Trump being Wilson is yeah. This is where we fall into the habit of we as people in general fall into the habit of the idea that there has to be perfect repetition. No, we are
It's cyclical.
more
I'll
in
say
the
that.
1890s. We're more in the 1890s. We're in the transitional phase from what was effectively the Gilded Age to the Progressive Era. We're not in the Progressive Era yet, but we are advancing into it.
That's so. What makes you think that specifically?
All the factors at play, I think if I were to boil it down to one aspect specifically, I think it is the social circumstances that we're facing, which is large
According.
scale economic development, sort of a shaking up of the domestic population by large waves of immigration is another big factor. Large discipline with a lot of the youth class, and in an attempt to adapt to the emerging technology by the older generations, which contributes to further dissatisfaction by the youth. The emergence of a lot of these more radical reformer type of figures. Um, and it's sort of the reality that the United States is transforming from one phase to another. Because what you had in the transition from the Gilded Age to the Progressive Era was the United States realizing that it was no longer just this regional agricultural backwater. America was a great power. And we've sort of been living in the reality of America as the global superpower. And that is a reality that a lot of the young people are just kind of dissatisfied with. And the realities of our changing world are no longer exactly making easy for us. So you are seeing the shift of the United States from perhaps global superpower to great local power that focuses on its own sphere once again. The way things had been for decades just isn't driving with where a lot of the youth wants to go. And it's not just a circumstance like, say, the 60s where you had, oh, well, we don't want to go to war or whatever. You have massive leaps in technology. You have large changes to the way that people are living and a failure by the older generations to be able to properly adapt to it to where they seem extremely out of touch. Like the thing that if you read into the history books, uh, McKinley, Blaine, well, maybe not Blaine. He was more of a machine politician, but sort of that yoke of uh, pre-progressive or early progressive era Republicans. They saw themselves as reformers. They saw themselves like, wow, we are absolutely uprooting the corruption in the country. But the young people of that generation, I believe the missionary generation is what it would have been, um, were like, this is awful. This is not enough. You would have a fascinating example that I read some months ago was it no, I'm thinking of a different book. But I had read about how all across urban areas, and this was in New York City in particular, you had sort of the uh, advent of the implementation of these communication lines, of these electrical lines, uh, and the older generations were like, wow, we have brought electrical lighting to our cities. We have brought instant communication to our country. And the youth growing up in this circumstance was just looking at it like, this is hideous. Like, look at all these strings just hanging from all these poles. Look at how bright these lights are. And they took those initial innovations and they made them better because they weren't growing up in a world where electrical lighting was this miraculous thing. They grew up in a world where it was a given and it was imperfect. So they saw the need to make it better. Because electric lighting, yeah, I've always had that. I've always lived with that. Let's make it so I can actually look at it without burning my eyes. Let's make it so that the communication lines aren't blocking out the sun. And that's very much what we have right now, where you have all these older politicians who are like, "Wow, we are making America great again. Look at how." And it's on both sides too. It's like you have the Republicans who are like, "We're making America great again," and you have the Democrats who are like, "Wow, we are giving so much progress to the youth." And the youth on both sides are like, "This is awful. I can't buy a house. We have so much immigration coming in. We're fighting in the Middle East again. Who thinks this is a good idea?" So you give that generation like another decade or so, and suddenly they're putting in power people who make the radicals of today look tame by comparison. And radical doesn't just mean like extreme in the, oh, this is very unpalatable. Radical in the sense of changing things, dramatically shifting the way things operate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right, I do got to get going.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. No, I go through these manually. But yeah, no. You can do concluding thoughts. I'll just chill out.
Um, I don't have any concluding thoughts. My throat just kind of, I don't know if you could notice, but I had a sore throat.
Yeah, no, I deeply
Uh,
apologize. I was trying to transition to the other topics I had, but like the Utahism one just kept fucking going. I don't know if you could notice that, but yeah, no,
no, I think that took up like an hour of our discussion.
yeah, I know. I was trying to get it. I don't know if you noticed, but like 40 minutes in, I was trying to get it to move on to somewhere else. I was like, that's why I kept bringing up hypothetically you're the president. Hypothetically you're the fucking president.
Well, what were the other questions? Just out of curiosity.
Basically, neo-progressivism. I tried to ask you about the future of the GOP. That didn't really go anywhere. Hypothetically, running 2020 campaign. Vance or Rubio. Obviously, I did watch a new video. Obviously, you're more for Vance. I'm personally more for Rubio. Not really because I agree with him, but because
Really?
I find him. I don't trust Vance. Like I said, I don't trust millennials. I do not trust Vance.
I don't think a lot of people trust Vance.
No, I
I
don't
feel
trust
like a
Vance
lot
at
of people
all.
are skeptical of Vance.
I don't
But
trust Vance. I don't really care about the Peter Thiel
is
shit. I
this
just
is
yeah.
this sort of a the devil you know versus the devil you don't kind of situation?
No, so I don't really care about the Peter Thiel shit. It's like whatever. Everyone has fucking Zionistic connections. Like I probably have Zionistic connections I don't even know about, right? Like everyone
What a
does,
thing to
bro.
say.
Hey, no, I'm just saying like everyone's got the Jewish connection, right? But like here's the thing. Vance has not proven himself as competent in my opinion. I want ideally I think DeSantis would be running currently. Of the actually no Miller. I think Miller would be running ideally in my opinion. But
Really? I'm not sure Miller has the
no,
I'm
he's not
not sure
very
Miller has the
presidential like,
charisma to
but I
be
like him.
president.
No,
Yeah.
that's true. Presidencies now is uh
About Riz.
personality based. Yeah. But no, I ideally I think a Rubio run. Like if in the primaries I will be writing in Rubio, but because he's competent. I want a competent guy. I want to run someone who's competent. I see Vance as this like Mark Anthony type where yeah, he's the successor, but he's a weak one. And then
All right,
everything
so
else.
you're expecting Baron Trump to like
No.
rise up. He's going to slay Vance, and then what? Usha's gonna try to like seduce Baron.
I have no fucking clue. But no, I don't know.
Look at that. I think my New Yorker rubbed off on you. I got no fucking clue.
no, it's
The
like
way you
okay,
said
like
that.
it's either well, it's you know, you have I don't know. I just do not I think Vance is a very weak person and I don't like that about him. And then the rest of it was just like how would he achieve you we already did this. We did it out of order, which was like the first day in office, how would he achieve Utahism, and then oh yeah, actually, I guess to wrap it off nicely, uh where the fuck is the channel going? Cause like, what the fuck happened to that Zinema shit? Where's that? It's gone.
Oh yeah, you're asking
What happened to
about
all
yeah, you're
that? What the
asking about
hell?
the well, the main channel is doing well. USFZ is doing solid as well. We're launching a third channel on top of that. But what happened with Cinematica? What happened with Studio Z? So this was the initial third channel that was planned out, and this was planned out a while ago. Scripts were written out. We had some really cool video topics together, but the guy who I was putting in charge of that was operating very, very slowly, to the point where I thought, if we launch this channel, I can't count on him to be able to sustain it, you know? That's a big problem.
Ah,
If this channel goes up, then like it takes him 3 months to put a video together.
better than me.
Yeah, that's not gonna work out. Oh right, yeah, yeah. You do
Really?
take your
I,
sweet
I
time
feel
putting videos
insulted.
together.
I feel you're attacking a fellow person of who takes his time. We'll say
A,
that.
a fellow
A
chud.
fellow chud who takes his time. And then of course you have that new project, that new channel. What's that all about? The red one.
Ah yes. Yes, so that is Dossier Z. That's going to be a sort of a cultural analysis channel. And I don't want to spoil the topics we're talking about just yet, but that's already way further along than Studio Z ever got. We have at least some of the videos completely finished already. Um, and the last few videos, those should be ready probably in a few weeks.
All right. Let's hope, because you told us Cinema was coming out January and that never happened. But I will be
Well, I
watching.
also I will I did tell you back in January that the guy I was working with, he was working a lot slower than I thought he was going to, and that's that's what threw a bit of a wrench into the situation. But um, Studio Z isn't necessarily dead. It's on, we'll say it's on pause for now. There's a chance it'll be revived if I find the right person, or if the fellow who I put in charge of it decides that he suddenly wants to work a lot faster. Then we'll see. Then we'll see. But um, in any case, I already have two of the videos for that channel done. I'm just holding them for now. So I hope that one day they will be published. I hope one day people will be able to watch them because they were pretty good.
Mhm. Anyways, it's been very nice talking with you. Um,
Yeah,
I
dude, it's been a pleasure.
I feel bad that, well, I failed to, I guess, get through my whole docket, so I kind of feel bad about that. But yeah, no, it's been a pleasure talking with you. And of course, we're doing a stream on Saturday. Is that correct? Or Sunday?
Sunday, yes.
All right, Sunday evening, I assume. More proper time.
Yeah, dude.